Alright, what's up guys? I haven't made a video in a very long time and there is a reason for that. I am making a video about that reason and that will be up soon, so just please be patient. Today we're going to be talking about a compound that's been in the news and people have been talking about a lot recently. It's called 7-hydroxymetragenine, or 7-OH, or 7-O. 7-O has recently come under scrutiny by the FDA, HHS, and other state and local governments. The commissioner of the FDA actually said that this might be the next wave of the opioid crisis that we have in America. But on the other side, we have people who love this compound and who say it gives them real relief from actual chronic issues. So which one is it? Is 7-O the worst compound to hit the streets since oxycodone, or is it the best solution to long-term chronic pain? Well, as always on this channel, it's a little more complicated than that. First, let's start with what 7-O actually is. 7-O is one of the over 25 alkaloids found inside of the kratom leaf. Kratom is a plant found in Southeast Asia, and it's actually been used for centuries by indigenous people there. However, a raw leaf actually contains very little 7-O. The difference is that the 7-O that you can legally buy over the counter in a tiny little tonic or drink or gummy or whatever it may be is actually a chemically isolated semi-synthetic version of 7-O. Now, 7-O binds the mu opioid receptor, which is the same as morphine and pretty much every other classic opioid. You can think of the mu opioid receptor as a door that triggers two different alarms. If you trip the first alarm, then you get pain relief. But if you trip the second alarm, then you get really bad stuff, like, for instance, respiratory depression, not breathing as much, cardiovascular depression, not having as fast of a heart rate, tolerance building up, constipation, all things like this. 7-O is what we call a biased agonist. What this means is it primarily hits the first receptor, the one for pain relief, while mostly avoiding the second alarm. Now, classic opioids, stuff like morphine or heroin, hit both alarms very hard. This is why you see a relatively high number of opioid overdoses from heroin, but a very low amount of opioid overdoses from something like 7-O. Even though 7-O is quite efficacious, it doesn't have these same side effects that other classic opioids do. When assessing a new opioid's effectiveness, we'll always compare it to morphine, which was the first opioid ever isolated. Oxycodone, which is one of the most commonly prescribed opioids in the US, has about a 1.5 times potency compared to morphine. Heroin is typically put at 2 to 5 times, and 7-O is approximately 13 times as potent as morphine. But compare that to fentanyl, which is about 50 to 100 times as potent as morphine, or carfentanil, which is over 10,000 times as potent as morphine. So this paints a complex picture. Yes, it is more effective than other traditional opioids, but not as potent as others, and that's why we have to look a little deeper. But let's zoom out for a second. Why are we even talking about opioids? There's a whole nother very commonly used class of medications to relieve pain. I'm of course talking about NSAIDs, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now this is stuff like Tylenol, Aleve, ibuprofen, Advil, any of these. So let's take a quick look at how NSAIDs work. NSAIDs work by blocking COX enzymes, which turns off the production of prostaglandins, which are the primary cause of inflammation. But take them long term and you'll get significant gastrointestinal, liver, and kidney damage. In fact, NSAIDs are so liver toxic that they're put in other drugs to prevent abuse. For example, Percocet is made with acetaminophen primarily so that if you abuse too much of it, you'll die of acute liver failure in a few days. But now let's switch back to opioids. They don't touch inflammation at all. Instead, they act on the central nervous system, which changes the way that your brain reacts to pain signals. With long-term use, the risk is completely different. You're going to be looking at something like addiction or acute overdose rather than big respiratory failure over a long period of time, though that does happen. So the main difference between NSAIDs and opioids is that for opioids, their harm is mainly acute harm and addiction potential, but for NSAIDs, their harm is mainly long-term stuff with like gastrointestinal issues, liver damage, and kidney damage, as I said before. Another way that we can assess a drug's safety is by its NOAEL. NOAEL measures long-term harm. In an NOAEL safety study, they'll give patients varying doses of a drug and measure the adverse reactions long term. Whatever the highest dose that can be observed without any negative reactions is considered the NOAEL dose. A study from the FDA on Oxycontin's toxicity showed that its NOAEL is approximately 2 milligrams per kilogram. For an 180-pound person, this is over 160 milligrams a day of Oxycontin, which is over twice the daily recommended limit by the FDA for Oxycontin. But for acetaminophen, ibuprofen or Tylenol, the daily recommended limit is around 1,000 milligrams. But if you go up to 4 grams, then you'll start getting adverse side effects long term. Now the ratio for Tylenol is less than half of that for oxycodone. Now in addition, one study actually found that 1 in 1,200 people using NSAIDs for under 2 months will die of gastrointestinal problems. But for prescription opioid users, only 1 in over 4,700 people will die in every year that they use prescription opioids from opioid overdose. Now I'm not making some blanket statement like NSAIDs are safer than opioids because they're two completely different types of risk. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes we unfairly villainize opioid medications not because they're actually dangerous, but because we just see them as more dangerous than the NSAIDs that we already use. Now this does feel like a good time to reiterate that I am not a doctor and I'm also not your doctor, and I'm not giving you medical advice, and you should always consult a medical professional before making any medical decisions. Now let's talk about why 7-0 and kratom in general became so big so fast. Now concentrated 7-0 is a relatively new drug. It was only in 2025 to 2026 that it really started hitting gas station shelves. In particular, the most popular type of 7-0 extract is this product right here called Feel Free. It's this blue little bottle that looks like some health tonic, but actually it has concentrated opioids in it. Now it makes total sense why Feel Free and other kratom extracts are so popular. I mean, they're cheap, they're readily available, you don't have to be a certain age to buy them, and it works just like any other opioid. The Washington Poison Center has some real numbers about 7-0 exposure. In August 2025 alone, they had over 1,800 calls involving kratom extracts, and about a third of them specifically involved 7-0. Now compare that to the average of 1,000 calls per year that they got from 2015 to 2024. The FDA's adverse event database logged over 83 cases involving 7-0 in 2025 to 2026. 79 of these events were classified as serious, and some of them were even fatal. And withdrawal symptoms from products like Feel Free can last months, not the typical weeks or days that you get from typical opioid withdrawal. One 7-0 user from the Midwest reported that quitting 7-0 was harder than quitting the heroin habit he had previously had. For typical opioid withdrawal, we have medications like Suboxone, which physically block the opioid receptor. However, since something like kratom use disorder isn't an official diagnosis, they can't really prescribe Suboxone for this purpose. So who's right? Well, probably neither side. Look, whenever you take away an opioid or really anything from anybody, they're just gonna find a different way to get it. But this doesn't mean we should just legalize everything. We should just at least have a plan in place to help these people who are struggling from 7-0 addiction. The part that I see everybody missing is that there's nothing inherently bad or different about 7-0. It just is an opioid that's legal and very readily accessible. But there's nothing intrinsically very harmful about 7-0. Like, if you're doing heroin or you're doing 7-0, I mean, it's just about potency. It's not actually, like, chemically that different. Like, yeah, it's a selective agonist, so it's not as harmful for, like, respiratory depression and stuff, but there's nothing, like, exceptionally bad about 7-0. It's just that it's legal and readily accessible. It's kind of a similar situation to my meth versus Adderall video, which if you're interested, it'll be up there somewhere. But there's nothing chemically that different. It's just a different type of harm. So the argument isn't, is it harmful? I mean, obviously it's harmful. Nobody's arguing that. The real argument is about how it should be used and how we should regulate its use. But I don't know, I'm just some random guy on the internet, so if you have any ideas about this or you want to make any corrections to this video, feel free to leave that in the comments. I'm always open. That being said, I hope you enjoyed watching this video because I had a lot of fun making it. If you watched this far in the video, thank you. If you want to subscribe, you can. Thank you for watching.